The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Coffee with Caleffi today. This is not Bob Hot Rod Rohr. He is somewhere in an airplane between California and Missouri. This is Kevin Freet up here in Milwaukee, and today's Coffee with Caleffi webinar is all about modern pipe connection methods with Cody Mack. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Cody. Enjoy, everyone. You ready, Cody?
Yes, I am, Kevin. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Happy Thursday. As Kevin mentioned earlier, our topic today is losing that torch. We're going to talk about some of the modern piping connections that are available. Maybe you haven't quite tried them yet, but our agenda, today we're going to be talking about some of the kind of the standardized or legacy type connections that you're already used to. We're going to go over some of the pros and cons, and we're also going to be going over some of the other things that are driving people away from these legacy connections and pushing them towards alternative connection methods. So from there, we're going to try to dive a little bit deeper into press connections, PEX, groove, PPR, some of the things that we're seeing gaining popularity with our customer base. And then we're going to go over some of the offerings that we here at Caleffi are making available to you to make your jobs easier that might coincide with some of these alternative piping connections. So let's get right into it. The first one is going to be soldering, sweating pipe. It is a tried and true connection method. It really is an industry standard that's been decades. Actually started in 1930. It was developed by Mueller Industries with their streamline fittings. One of the great things about soldered connections is that they are inexpensive, and it's easy to find fittings and valves. I mean, you can find them in any wholesale supply house, home improvement store, whatever the case may be. It's also inexpensive as far as your investment to start working on soldered connections. You're just looking at your torch, your solder, your flux, some of your scratch cloths, so on and so forth. Just like a lot of different types of connections, your prep work is going to be key when you're doing soldering. So, it's one of those things that you always got to think about, but it's just something that you got to make sure you do that prep work in order to get a good clean joint. From there, when you are soldering, it's using a capillary action to draw that molten solder into the fitting. And one of the things that's really great about soldered connections that you can see here on the slide is that soldered connections in most cases can be taken apart. So if you are looking at something where it's just not quite in the right position, or you need to change some piping down the line a little bit, you can take it apart. Just a quick mention here on the right hand side, we've got a nice picture from Triple H Hydronics. They're out of Calgary. If you want to see some real artwork with Hydronics, look up their social media and stuff like that. Their website too is very, very great. So next we're going to have NPT. Again, just like sweat connections, they're going to be an industry standard. The standard for NPT connections was actually developed in 1864 by a gentleman by the name of William Sellers. This standard included nuts, bolts, screws, and pipe threads. Again, inexpensive and easy to find valves and fittings. Your startup costs there are going to be investing in some wrenches, whether they be pipe wrenches, channel locks, so on and so forth. NPT is available in many different materials as well. So you've got your black iron pipe, you've got your brass, bronze, plastic piping, you've got copper NPT connections as well as stainless steel and so on and so forth. So it's available across a broad range of connections or material types. Also, just like sweat, you can take it apart as long as it hasn't rusted together for about 5 decades, and in which case you just got to get out that 4-foot pipe wrench and get a few guys on it. So now let's talk about some of the things that are driving contractors away from these legacy connections. With soldering, like I mentioned previously, prep is everything. Cutting, deburring, sanding, fluxing, it's a time-consuming process. And while I'm sure that there are many out there, many people out there, including people on this actual webinar, that would contest the speed of soldered connections in plumbing and hydronic applications. I think somebody that's going to be fast at soldering is going to be fast at any other connection option available if given the opportunity. So it's not a good excuse, not to look at some of these alternative connection methods. The other big thing is going to be safety. Safety is a huge issue in today's world of liability. It's something you can't overlook. Safety applies not only to the structure or the home that you're working in, but to the contractor as well, to the guy working on the actual system. Open flames can clearly start unwanted fires, but you're also working with hot fittings, and you're working with solder that inevitably drips and finds a place on your body that makes you curse like a longshoreman. This, along with a lot of other safety concerns, are why I never wore any jewelry like my wedding ring or anything like that while I was out in the field, because you got to really try to stay as safe as possible while you're out there working. Now, when it comes to NPT, same thing. Threaded connections are time consuming. About the only exception to this rule is if you are working out of a nipple tray. The ability to start up with NPT connections does require an investment in tools if you are going to be threading your own pipe, whether it's going to be a manual threader, or you can see there in the lower right a powered threader from Rigid or the like. The next big thing with NPT is that you're typically dealing with steel pipe in a lot of cases, and you're looking at a lot of debris inside those pipes. You've got your cutting oil, you've got dirt, you're going to have dope from your sealing methods, your tape as well, and it's something that's going to be getting inside your system, plumbing or hydronic. It's something that you don't want in there. Thread condition, excuse me, is also a big issue. Even the best threading tools with the sharpest dies can tear up threads on a piece of pipe, depending on the quality of the pipe and things like that. You even run into problems transporting NPT threaded pipe. I've seen it banged into walls, drug across floors, and all the like. And then after that's all said and done, you need to put a fitting on it. And it's something you really got to watch out for. And again, like I said, with NPT, and especially in hydronic systems, you're typically using steel pipe, and this is going to be much more susceptible to corrosion. I've actually heard of many contractors going completely non-ferrous with their hydronic jobs. We're talking about closed loop systems, so I mean the chances for corrosion and oxidization are very small. So I think this might be overkill, but especially in a closed system, but it certainly can't hurt when it comes to oxidization and things like that. Now here's a big one. When you're in areas that are prone to wildfires, or you're working in healthcare or nursing home type facilities, a lot of those facilities and a lot of those areas of the country are going to require what are referred to as hot work permits. And hot work permits are really one of the big driving forces behind alternative connections, because these alternative connections are going to, as we've already talked about, lose the torch. So some of the bigger downsides with hot work permits is that they typically are going to require 2 people on the job, one of which is going to be Firewatch certified. From there, there's a laundry list of things that you got to do as far as making sure that you put down non-combustible flooring or cover up things, your sweeping and cleaning methods before and after. It also requires typically a permit, whether it be through the facility that you're working in or through the fire department in the local area. The Firewatch certified person is also going to have to remain on site after that work is completed for a designated amount of time to make sure that nothing, starts on fire, so that way they can take care of it. So a big thing throughout the country, we've seen in a lot of the news and a lot of the media that obviously wildfires are nothing to mess around with. So we want to make sure that we not only stay safe for ourselves, but for our communities as well. Now, this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, the labor shortage. Having worked in the field and catching the brunt of this problem, I'm really happy to see that contractors, wholesalers, colleges, and so on are addressing the skilled trades. The Bureau of Labor and Statistics is actually projecting a 15 to 16% increase in employment of HVAC and plumbing fields between now and 2026. This is compared to 7% growth or average growth rate of all other occupations. So you can see there's going to be a pretty big jump. And the problem is that there's just not enough skilled labor to go around, and this is really putting a lot of the contractors and a lot of the service guys in a real pickle, because the work doesn't go away. It only keeps adding up. So I think a lot of these alternative connection methods are going to make jobs a lot easier, a lot quicker, and get you moving from the one job to the next. So I would have to say the biggest splash in modern piping connections for plumbing and hydronic applications has to be press. You know, it's a great connection method that Viega actually introduced to the world in 1989, and many other manufacturers have followed suit. You know, Nibco, JW. So on and so forth. Press options are now available for copper, for stainless steel, and even black iron pipe. These connections are made with a press tool that's going to encompass the fitting. You can kind of see this little enlarged portion of the fitting on each side, and from there, that press tool is going to encompass that fitting with a set of jaws or a ring and just crimp it down. This not only keeps the fitting from moving, but it compresses the O-ring around the pipe that you're joining. Remember that different materials will require different jaws, so please, you know, look to the tool manufacturer that you're working with for guidance on that one. But in most cases, you're going to have a set of jaws for copper and a set of jaws for stainless steel or black iron or whatever you happen to be working with. So its biggest advantage is going to be time savings. There's no disputing that, but it's also fantastic for wet repairs. When you just can't get that water to stop trickling out of that water, you know, out of that line, you can put the bag of bread away. You don't have to worry about keeping a few slices on the truck. You can just use that press tool, and it's going to make your life a lot easier. I've even seen guys replacing valves on water mains with a press tool live, and sure, they take a nice bath, but they got the job done. While the fittings are more expensive than traditional sweat or NPT fittings, the labor savings just by itself can typically justify the costs. If anything, press tools or press connections can allow you to get to the next job faster, which is, you know, as we all know, that's gonna put more money in the bank for you. So one thing to consider with press is that it is permanent. You know, once you've pressed that fitting, you know, if it's the wrong fitting or it's not in the right spot, you're going to be cutting it out, and that's kind of one of the big downsides of press, in my opinion. But you know, if you've got that fitting and it's not quite angled the right way, I have heard of guys that have been able to turn the fittings at that point, you know, that are not pointing in the right direction, and press them again. Now, luckily, I haven't run into that situation myself, but it stands to reason that it should work. I mean, again, you're just looking at an O-ring that's sealing to the surface of the outside diameter of the pipe. So as long as that O-ring is still intact, you know, more power to you. One thing you really have to consider as well with press, because of the size of the tool and how it needs to operate, is you got to think about, you know, the possibility of painting yourself into a corner. It's a real issue, and so there is a bit of a learning curve with press tools, and it's not a lot, but you really got to be thinking a few steps ahead, and it's really crucial, because that tool just won't fit everywhere. You know, you're working in tight sill boxes, you know, underneath cabinets, you know, so on and so forth. You know, you just got to really think ahead on where that tool is going to be able to fit. excuse me. One thing that I've actually seen come about in the last few years, and our good friend Eric Ani over at Mechanical Hub has been talking about pretty frequently, is these ring kits. You can actually see them down here at the bottom. The ring kits allow you to put that ring around the fitting and then actually use the press tool on the ring kit. And then the press tool has a full range of motion, 180 degrees, and it doesn't have to be perpendicular to the pipe. I think this is a game changer for those tight space kind of jobs, and it's good to see innovations like that coming down the pipeline. So. But just like sweat or NPT connections, prep is going to be a key item. Like I said, the learning curve is pretty quick, but beyond cutting the pipe, you really need to make sure that pipe is clean. So if there's any paint on it or any oils or greases or anything like that, you want to clean that off, and then you're going to deburr it. You're going to deburr the inside and outside diameter of the pipe. You want to make sure that there's nothing on the exterior or the outside of that pipe that's going to scratch or mangle up that O-ring as you put that fitting onto the pipe. It's also wise to look for scratches in the pipe or something that might be stamped into the pipe as well. Remember, inside that fitting, it's an O-ring, and that O-ring needs to seal to that pipe, and if it's not doing that, you're looking at a leak. This here is going to be a great looking install. I believe it's out of New York. In this particular case, they're using some of our separators here, one of our air separators, our Discal air separators, and one of our dirt and magnetic separators down there at the bottom as well. And one thing I want to point out here is that you've got this whole wall full of press connections on this great looking install, but you'll notice, and it's kind of hard to see in the picture here without zooming in, but you'll notice that those two separators are in sweat. And what I want you to always remember is that here at Caleffi, we are working very hard to add more and more new product with alternative connections. This job actually was just installed prior to our press offerings in those air and dirt separator lines. And so just remember to keep an eye on our product offerings and make sure that you're keeping up with that as well. So we are now offering those in 1 to 2 inch sizes, and again, we're adding more and more product every year. Now, as I mentioned before, press is applicable to many different types of pipe. It's also a great solution for whatever you're moving through the pipe as well. So they actually have options for gases and even refrigeration. Typically with gases, you're looking at different types of sealing elements inside that fitting. So if you're using some of the Viega stuff, it's going to be a different colored gasket and so on and so forth, or even a different paint mark on the fitting and things like that. But what I thought was really cool is Sporlan actually currently even has press options, or their zoom lock fittings for refrigeration. I can't count how many times I've been trying to braze a line set in a tight area and just praying that I'm not setting anything on fire. So I think that's a really cool option. I'd be curious to see how well that goes for them. So, but for plumbing and hydronic applications, most of the major manufacturers are using EPDM seals. These are going to be typically used for your water and your glycol solutions. And just like our press con fittings that we use in all of our press lineup, most are incorporating some type of leak detection with their O-rings. And this allows you to detect joints that haven't been pressed. So if you put water or fluid or pressure inside that system, the fluid is actually going to leak out through that O-ring around the fitting, and it'll allow you to say, hey, wait a second, I need to press that. The blessing and the curse with press connections is that they are incredibly easy to dry fit when you're installing to get everything laid out exactly where you want it. But when you have a wall full of fittings, it's surprisingly easy to forget one. So something to remember there. Now, when it comes to piping materials, PEX, or cross-linked polyethylene, is certainly leading the way when it comes to alternatives for plumbing and heating applications. This piping material is available all the way up to sizes up to 4 inches in diameter, and comes in with many different options for connections as well. It's also available in a few different flavors. You're going to typically have your PEX A, your PEX B, and PEX C as well. You've got some of your PEX L PEX and so on and so forth. But some of those different options there may dictate the connections that are being used. One thing to remember is that the A, B, and C designations are not a grading system. Okay, these designations are just telling you how the polyethylene was cross-linked. Now, opinions on PEX A, B, and C are really it's a Chevy versus Ford kind of debate, as they all have some pluses and minuses, but typically we're seeing the A and B varieties being most common. No matter which PEX you choose, they all have to adhere by the same ASTM standard and standard for pressures, temperatures, bend radiuses, dimensions, so on and so forth. So don't be worried about that. But PEX became a part of history in the late 1960s. It was actually started, the cross-linking method was actually developed by a man named Thomas Engel, but it was in the European markets for quite some time, but it actually didn't land in North America until the mid 80s. I find it absolutely incredible to think that that something that is roughly 50 years old can still be considered new technology by a lot of people. You know, and PEX really had its hurdles in the beginning of its life in our market, but it is gaining market share like crazy just due to its flexibility, its costs, and ease of installation. I actually know quite a few plumbers that won't even quote copper systems anymore on a first quote unless somebody asks for it, because they just can't be as efficient and effective as they can be with PEX versus copper. The rough start PEX had in our market had a lot to do with previous tubing options like polybutylene. Polybutylene has since gone the way of the dodo in North America, but it had a terrible reputation, and it wasn't necessarily due to their pipe, it was due to their fittings. But the problem here is that PEX is not polybutylene, but because of its similarities, it did take a lot of slack in the beginning. Now, last but not least, depending on your application, whether it be plumbing or hydronic, closed loop hydronic type systems, you're going to want to be aware of the oxygen barrier options that are available. So there are non-barrier tubing options and oxygen barrier tubing options. The oxygen barrier is something that you're going to need in your closed loop hydronic system, and it's actually a polymer layer on the outside of the pipe. And without it, oxygen can actually diffuse through the wall of the pipe on, say, standard plumbing PEX, which you're going to find there on the left. And this oxygen will, like I said, diffuse through the pipe and increase the oxidization and failure of any ferrous components in your systems. This is going to be things like cast iron volute pumps, piping, black iron piping, expansion tanks, and even boilers too, for that matter. So you really got to be careful on the type of tubing that you're using. Now, in some cases, a lot of the non-barrier tubing that you're going to find for plumbing applications is going to be a really dull matte finish on the outside. So if you do see a dull matte finish, typically that's going to be your non-barrier tubing. And in most cases with the oxygen barrier tubing, it's going to be a little shinier on the outside. So it's pretty easy to see at a glance for most brands. Now let's go over the two most popular connection types that I'm seeing. Now this won't include manifolds for some of your radiant heating applications. Those are typically going to be using some form of compression fitting. But the first that we're going to find for connecting PEX to fittings is going to be copper crimp rings. These are going to be the ASTM F1807 fitting that you're going to find that's available for use with pretty much any PEX that's out there. That's going to be this guy in the upper left corner here. It's an inexpensive option to enter the world of PEX, and it's available at most home improvement stores and certainly available at a lot of your wholesale supply houses. In the case of these crimp rings, you just slide the crimp ring over the tubing and then the tubing over the fitting. And at that point, you just use the manual crimp tool to secure that ring down to the outside of the pipe or the tube, and you're done. This connection, it can be a bit clumsy as you try to position the ring in the tool, and if you're trying to balance on a ladder and all that other fun stuff. But it can also make for a difficult installation in tight spaces, because you do, just like those press connections I was talking about earlier, you've got that tool and it can be a bit long in order to be able to crimp down that ring. Now the next one, and I'm seeing this stuff just absolutely everywhere, is going to be cold expansion connections. Now, the one thing to remember with cold expansion connections is that this is a connection that is exclusive to PEX A piping. PEX A piping is typically going to be your Uponor, your Rayhow, your Sioux Chief. And in this application, you're going to slide a PEX ring over the outside diameter of the tubing. You can kind of see it here in that lower right-hand picture, those little PEX rings right there. And after that, you're going to use an expansion tool on the inside of the tubing. Now, this expansion tool can be powered or manual if you're Popeye, and you use it to expand the end of the tubing and the ring. And once that is expanded, you can actually slide it right over the fitting. Okay, and once you slide it over that fitting, the tubing is gonna, because the PEX A piping has a memory, it wants to revert back to its original size and its original shape. So it's gonna lock down on that barbed fitting, and it's going to forever be trying to get back to that original size. Another nice thing about cold expansion is that these fittings are available in brass. Like you can see here, this is one of our expansion type fittings that we offer. And then they do also offer plastic or engineered polymer fittings as well for typically for plumbing applications. I'm finding that many prefer the expansion connections just due to the fact that when you've got your fittings, and those fittings aren't actually throttling down as far as the inside diameter, and the fittings for the cold expansion are going to much closer match the original inside diameter of the tubing through the material. And even though marginal, you're going to have a little bit less pressure drop through these fittings, through the cold expansion type fittings. So a lot of guys really like that. Now, one thing to watch out for with these cold expansion fittings is going to be your ambient temperatures. When you're expanding these in cold temperatures, the tubing is going to want to come back to its original shape, but when it's cold out, it's going to take a bit longer to do that, and it might not even get there by the time you're looking to pressure test. So if you are looking to use this type of a fitting in a low ambient temperature application, just make sure to bring a heat gun with you, and you can warm up those fittings a little bit, and then it'll suck it right back down into place. Now, there are actually quite a few other options for PEX, and you know, I went over the two most popular kind of more in depth, but there are quite a few others. And you know, for example, in the upper left here, you've got the stainless steel cinch rings. This is going to be a similar process to the crimp rings. It's you know, the fittings are actually going to be similar. That's the same ASTM F1807 fittings, but then from there you've got companies like Viega that are actually introducing press connections onto their PEX. You're going to have installation procedures with these guys that are going to be similar to pressing fittings to hard pipe, but it does require the use of a special manual tool, or you can even get a special jaw set for your powered press tools as well. There's actually another pretty unique fitting for your PEX A piping in the lower left right there, and this is going to be it's an ASTM F2080 standard, and it's similar to the cold expansion type fittings. This was made popular by Rayhow, for example, but there are other manufacturers using it now as well. Instead of using a PEX ring on the outside and expanding the whole pipe and the PEX ring, you're actually going to just use a metal sleeve, and you're going to expand the inside of the pipe, push it onto that fitting, and then actually slide that sleeve over the PEX and the pipe using that tool that you can see there. This connection system is incredibly stout. It's very, I would even say, bulletproof for a lot of cases, but it can come with a price tag. Typically your fittings are going to be a little bit more expensive just because you're not only buying the fitting but the metal sleeves as well. And last is going to be push fittings. Not necessarily my favorite in the whole wide world, but they do have their merits. They can be used on PEX as well as CPVC and copper. I think these are going to be great for temporary repairs. The one thing I really like about them is that you can remove them and take them with you and use them on another job if you need to. So now let's look into some of the options that are more available for the commercial and the larger pipe market. The first one here that we see a lot, and in a lot of our commercial applications, is going to be grooved coupling pipe joining systems. Again, very popular, especially among the larger commercial jobs, and especially fire sprinkler systems. This is going to be a great option compared to NPT or welding. NPT, obviously, you're bringing all those tools, you're bringing all that stuff with you, and welding, for example, you've got your inherent risks when it comes to fires or fumes. That the fumes alone from welding can bring their own potential health concerns. But this particular type of a system, you can see these fittings up here in the circled in the red there. These are going to be mechanical couplings, and they're pretty easy to put together. Typically, you can use either a socket and a wrench, or you can use an impactor, and I've seen actually being used at a lot of jobs. But it's a mechanical company that allows you to connect two pieces of pipe or a fitting to a pipe, and it uses a groove. And you can kind of see this cutaway down here on the lower right here, where you can actually see just a little bit of a groove in each pipe on each side, and that coupling joins into that groove and holds those two pieces of pipe together. Now that groove that's in that pipe that allows the coupler to hold them together is typically rolled into the pipe, but it can also be cut. Now, Rigid and other popular manufacturers, they make these machines, and some of which can even attach to pipe threaders, for example. But from there, you've got a gasket on the inside of that coupling, and that gasket is engaged when the coupling is completely tightened down. Again, very popular option among the commercial sector, especially, like I said, fire sprinkler systems, but they also do a lot of other different types of industries as well. When I was looking this up, I enjoy history, and when I was looking this up, I was intrigued to find out that grooved couplings actually originated in the early 20s. There was a man, his name was Ernest Tribe, and he saw some of the big problems with the current day pipe joining methods that were being used actually on flamethrowers of all things, in trench warfare in World War I. And this is actually what started the Victory Pipe Joint Company, which then later became Victaulic, for example. The grooved coupling actually allowed for a bit of flexibility in the joint, which allowed for easy site fabrication and quick site fabrication. And it decreased the potential for leaks, which if you're carrying a flamethrower is a big issue. And it also increased productivity, when you're taking it apart and putting it back together and moving things around. These days you can get flexible or rigid couplings, but this particular method was quickly adopted by the military at that time, to be used for fuel and water transport. But it also moved into other applications like plumbing and hydronics really quickly. Again, a great connection type that we're seeing used a lot. Now, groove is not just for steel pipe. They make options for copper as well. You can see here we've got a nice high-low thermostatic mixing valve assembly here with some of our thermostatic mixing valves hiding out behind some of that unistrut there. I'm actually seeing too that they're developing options for rolled groove on or groove fittings on CPVC as well. So there's even more things coming down the pipeline there to think about. This here's a great photo. It's not only showing groove fittings, it's showing some of the welded fittings as well. So, but it's showing one of our combination air, dirt, and magnetic separators. And this is an installation that's actually at a television station in Canada. But yeah, funny story. Our rep in the area on this particular job was actually showing building management the capabilities of the separator, and they were performing a blowdown on that separator, getting all the dirt and debris that separator caught and getting it out of the system. And during that demonstration, the hose came flying out of the bucket and actually ruined a nice pair of shoes. And our good friend Ryan, he had to say a few nice words about the shoes and put them to rest. So if you see Ryan, ask him about his shoes. Now the next option here for piping and connections that I think has been really making a really big impression on the North American market is going to be PPR. You can see it here in this photo of this mechanical room. It's going to be this brightly colored blue and green. They also make other options for gray water and fire suppression systems as well, but most of the hydronic stuff is going to be blue. PPR or polypropylene random is a fairly new piping for the North American market, and it's actually been in use since the 80s in Europe, but it's only been introduced in the North American market since the mid 2000s, and it was first introduced into Canada, and then slowly came down into the United States. But PPR is a great substitute for steel piping on larger jobs. The advantages with PPR lie in the cost. It also the weight of the pipe. Typically, your PPR piping is going to be about 75 to 80% less weight than a comparable metal pipe. It also allows you a lot of options for on-site fabrication as well. It's also great for harsh water conditions, and PPR is actually it's when you're putting together PPR pipe, it's joined using what's called a fusion welding process. Now, in this process, depending on what you're doing, if you're doing a socket or a fusion type weld, you're going to clean up that pipe, and if you're doing a butt fusion type weld, you're going to square up the end of that pipe by shaving a bit off. But then at that point, you're going to heat both sides together at the same time. Again, whether it's a butt fusion or a socket fusion type weld, and then after that connection has been heated for a specific time, you're going to put those two pieces together, and again, for a specific time, you're going to let those two pieces cure. And after that socket fusion or that fusion type welding process, that weld is actually, it's a homogeneous pipe at that point. There's nothing that's part of the weld that's different than any other part of the pipe, and it's all one piece at that point. Typically, you're probably going to recognize some of the fusion welding processes from your high density polyethylene pipe that's used for, say, like geothermal loop fields and underground gas lines as well. But that's exactly the same way that you're doing with your PPR stuff as well. Now, there is a learning curve for the use of this product. There will also be an upfront cost for the tools involved, but you can do a lot of cool things with this. You can connect two pipes together using a butt weld without using any form of a coupling. You can also miter piping to create your own elbows on site. It's a really cool process and a cool material. But now, because fusion welding does require heat, this can sometimes be an issue in low ambient temperatures. One thing to consider is that, when you've got those low ambient temperatures, is that, things cool off and heat up, a lot quicker depending on how warm or cold the job site is. So just remember that. But another thing to consider that I think is even more important is thermal expansion. When you're using PPR, depending on the length of the runs and the range of temperatures, you can run into inches of expansion within a pipe that must be accounted for. So in a lot of cases, you're going to find that engineers will specify expansion loops in there, and that allows the pipe to move freely without being constrained. It's also going to be a permanent connection. So just like press connections that we talked about earlier, if you're making a mistake, get out your Sawzall. So now this particular mechanical room that I was showing you there is actually a mechanical room for a chicken barn. Chickens are big business up in Canada, and I thought I was doing a little research on this, and I found it very interesting to know that when you're maintaining ideal temperatures in a chicken barn, those chickens are going to be, depending on their temperature, are going to feed more and eat more, and this allows them to actually get the chickens to mere ounces to 5 pounds in roughly about 5 weeks. It's pretty incredible, but anything to get their weight up as quick as possible, so that way they can get to my dinner table. So I'm all about it. Now PPR, you know, it really got its hold in the commercial market as an alternative for those big steel jobs, and it's not just for those big jobs anymore. We're actually finding a lot of these jobs, these small jobs, especially throughout Canada, where it has been a lot more popular and was introduced a little earlier. You can see here we've got a job. This was actually a garage installation or a garage in-floor heating system that our good friend Graham installed. And then we've got, you know, the pipe being used along with our dirt mag dirt separator here on the right. Again, they offer it in actually all the way up to, I think it's 24-inch sizes, if I remember correctly, but they still offer it down in those small sizes too. So something to consider. Now, one question that came up pretty regularly throughout the registration questions, or the questions that came in with registration, was the longevity, or how these fittings and these alternative methods are going to hold up over time. You know, you can't help but be a little bit skeptical. You know, if you're used to what you know, and something else new comes along, you can't help but be skeptical. But I've found that you're always going to have a lot of early adopters that latch onto these particular connections, these new items pretty quickly, and then you're going to have those from the camp that always say, you know, I've been doing it for 30 years this exact same way. Why would I ever change? And I've worked for both types of companies, and each have their reasons, each have their horror stories from the days of, say, non-barrier tubing or the polybutylene or whatever, or maybe some job that just went south that they didn't make any money on. But most of these manufacturers for these alternative piping and alternative connection methods are going to have a pretty wild warranty on their products, and these companies they're just massive companies, and they're doing great these days. But the other thing to remember is that these connections and these options have been available in most cases for a really long time. You know, I mentioned before, it's not new technology. It's just might be a little bit newer for the North American market. So don't be afraid. You know, it's something. You know, obviously, like I said, you got the polybutylene, you've got the Kitech stuff. You know, people are afraid of new items, but a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about here is stuff that has been around for quite a while. So. Another big thing that comes up pretty regularly is taking the skill out of the trade. It's something I hear too often when it comes to alternative connections and piping, and I really don't think it's a huge issue. I still think the skill is in the trade, but it's just being typically put elsewhere into the trade. You know, when you're looking at these jobs, you've got controls, you've got combustion analysis, you've got system design and efficiency. You know, this isn't the good old days of forgiving cast iron boilers that weigh as much as a car, you know, and this means that you're going to have to think about the job. You know, you got to try and, you know, typically you're trying to cram 10 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound bag, and some of these new piping options and connection options can allow you to make some shortcuts on the job and make that job go a little bit quicker. But it is going to be what you make it. You know, I've seen jobs before with even nothing but push fittings that can look better than most soldered copper jobs before. And I don't know how they got a picture of my basement up here, but we're going to flip it over to the next slide here. And we're going to talk about some of the options that we here at Caleffi are offering to contractors as solutions to these problems. You know, that you're trying to find alternative connection methods, and we try to push those into our products based on your recommendations. So here we've got our flanged options and our commercial line of air, dirt, and hydraulic separators. This is going to be typically anything with that we've got with flanges, our steel vessel items. Now on these steel vessels that we produce, we use ANSI 150 flanges. And now the big thing with these guys is that they allow for easy transition to a lot of other connection types. You know, I We had pictures in previous slides where we showed flange connections going to groove piping and even PPR fittings as well. This particular picture shows a flanged hydraulic separator there on the right going to a press connection. This is a great looking install, by the way, from Kurt Kagel in Minnesota. And this was actually a church where they gutted the whole boiler room and just absolutely started over. The pile of piping that was ripped out of this job was quite impressive. You can also see some of our real nice quick setter balancing valves hiding over there as well. So great job on that one, Kurt, thank you. Now again, different options for connections. You've got a flange connection there actually going to what I believe is CPVC. This is going to be a chilled water job out in California. You can see that guy's sweating like a banshee. So, and then on our smaller items, you know, typically our smaller items are going to be 1/2 inch through 2 inch size valves. You can see here in the picture here, we've got a few of our different models on here, but one of the things that make us really unique at Caleffi with a lot of our product is going to be our union options. These are going to be similar to unions that you're going to see on plumbing or gas piping, but our unions are going to use a straight thread on them, and this is also known as a BSPP or a G thread. This is a very common thread in many of the components manufactured outside of North America, but this particular picture here shows some of our product, like our mixing valves here right in the middle. From there, you've got our zone valve in the upper left and our balancing valve down here as well. This particular picture shows a lot of the products with our 1 inch straight thread union connections. And on the right here, we've got some of our various tail pieces is what we refer to them. The tail pieces is what allows you to go from that union to whatever connection type you're working with. Not only does this union allow us to be flexible with the different connection types, but it also allows for serviceability in the future, especially when you're looking at plumbing and hydronic systems. You know, there's a good chance that you're gonna have to take something apart someday, and having a union is going to be an absolute blessing, and it's going to have to, you know, keep you from cutting pipe and re-threading connections or soldering down the road. So really cool little guy down here on the bottom. Again, I had it in a previous slide. It's going to be our latest addition, which is our expandable cold expansion PEX fittings, the ASTM F1960. That's used with popular options like Uponor and Suchief and Rehau. You can actually see it connected here on the bottom. Oops. You can see it here connected on the bottom to a new product that's coming down the line. This is going to be our serviceable spring check valve. It's a stainless steel body with unions on either side, and you can pull it out anytime without cutting pipe and service it if you need to. So a really cool little option there. Now, all of our unions are going to use what are called sealing washers, and sealing washers are used to create a watertight seal from the tail pieces that I talked about earlier to the product that you're working with, whether it be a pressure reducing valve or a hydraulic separator. These sealing washers are going to be much like gaskets on an engine, and they are going to be typically one-time use only. If you are going to be taking something apart, I would highly recommend having a fresh set of sealing washers with you. We offer many different sizes of sealing washers for our product, but a great tip for any of them is actually to wet the washers down before installing them. This is going to activate the adhesives on the faces of the sealing washer and make an airtight seal right away. So that way, if you are doing any air pressure testing, it's going to help you out there. But it also helps to create a better seal long term. Wetting them, like I said, activates that adhesive and really helps them to stick together. So another thing to remember, that when tightening down these unions on our product, a little bit of force goes an absolute long ways. So put down that big cheater bar and everything else. You know, you really don't have to go after it too hard. And in a lot of cases, you can actually crush these sealing washers. So be very careful. So Our unions, they offer a lot of flexibility, and this can also be a source of confusion as well, but we've really tried to make this pretty easy for you guys. In our catalog, whether it be printed or PDF format that's available online, we actually have a fitting configuration table that you can see here hiding out in section 8 of our catalog. This allows you to find the product that you're working with on the left-hand side here, and it allows you to see all of the different fittings, sizes, and connections that we offer for every different product. What I've got circled here, or outlined here in red, is going to be the options that we have available for our 1-inch unions. For those 1-inch unions, we have 1/2-inch, 3/4, and 1-inch connections available in NPT, male and female NPT, sweat, press, PEX crimp, and expansion. There's a lot of different options there, and just another great resource for you if you're looking at what can we connect this up to. Now, the other thing that's really cool about union type fittings, typically you're going to have a union on either end of whatever type of valve or fitting that you're working with. And one of the things that might have caught your eye with that serviceable spring check that I showed you earlier is that we actually had a press fitting on one side and we had PEX fitting on the other. This is a fantastic thing about unions, is that you can actually transition from connection types from one side of the fitting to the, or one side of the valve to the other. So, for example, here, and this is a photo from our lab. This is one of our 132 quick setter pluses. And over here, I've actually got a male NPT connection on the inlet. And then from there, I've got press on the outlet. I also added a nice little ball valve there for isolation, and a male NPT by press connection on the other side of that. Now on the bottom here, we've got one of our infamous Z1 zone valves for hydronic applications. And say you're working with a black iron header off of a boiler, we've got a female NPT connection here on the inlet, and from there, excuse me, you can just go straight to press without having to create a transition or anything like that elsewhere in the system. And so, excuse me, this is just something that can make your life a lot easier and do that transition with your valve all in one foul swoop. Now, you might be thinking, why on earth were some of these fittings, like what we saw in some of the previous slides, why were these fittings so long? Why do they need to be so long? But a lot of these fittings allow us to install optional check valves. This is especially important in some of our plumbing products. For example, our anti-scald mixing valve, for example. This is going to be our ASSE 1070 point of use mixing valve. And per the ASSE standard, it actually requires check valves at both the hot and cold inlet. So you'll see here that that larger section here. Not only does it help you put a backing wrench on it, but it is a nice spot for a check valve as well. So you might notice in this picture on the left here that the guy, the installation contractor, had quite a few fittings on there to adapt it from, the connection options that we had at the time to get it down to 3/8 compression. But now we're actually offering that point of use mixing valve, which is typically used underneath sinks and for maybe a bank of lavatories or something like that. We're actually offering that now with direct connect 3/8 compression fittings. So it allows you to connect up your standard hoses directly to that valve without adapters. So to sum it all up here, the torch isn't the only answer. NPT is something that, I don't see soldering or NPT connections going away anytime soon. I call them legacy connections because I really don't think they're going to die, at least not in my lifetime. But there's a lot of great options out there for piping and connections. So just keep yourself open. A lot of times the reps for these products will allow you to demo or sample them for a specific job, and don't be afraid to try that. So, and the other thing to remember is that here at Caleffi, we are here to help. So if you have any questions pertaining to product or anything like that, or connection types, don't hesitate to call us. And it may surprise you. Much of our catalog is actually comprised of product that was inspired by requests from people like you.
Say thank you very much, Cody, for a great job today talking about alternative piping connections. And I'm going to pass it back over to you to close out.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Mark. I hope everybody enjoyed today's webinar. If anything, maybe it gave you a little bit of tidbit of information that you didn't know before, and maybe it might help push you in the direction of one of those alternative methods. And you guys have a great day.